Joining us here, though, on the big picture, the senator from Camden, Vincent Sheheen. Senator Sheheen, glad you could be here today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
The campaign kicked off really in earnest this week. You know who your opponent is, just your feelings about who you're running against here in Miss Haley.
Well, I'm very excited about the campaign and the reaction to our campaign over the last couple of weeks since we won the Democratic primary. And I think the election now presents a very stark and clear choice between the direction we want to go. Do we want to continue to do what we've done with Governor Mark Sanford and Representative Haley, who's been very close to him over the last 6 years, or do we want to go in a new direction? My style of leadership is one of much more cooperation, much more of bringing people together and building those bridges. And for us to be successful, I think that's the direction we have to go.
Is it a little bit overwhelming, in a sense, to see the attention that she's received on a national scale? Front page New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, many national news programs. She has turned into, literally overnight for a lot of people, a national figure of sorts. That's pretty tough.
Well, it's interesting to watch, frankly. She's been on the national news shows over the last couple of weeks. While she's been doing that, I've been talking to people in South Carolina, talking to media outlets in South Carolina. And I think what this election has to be about is South Carolina. We've been through with Mark Sanford the whole national media spotlight. It's been pretty much a disaster for our state. What we need to do is focus back on this state, and that's what I'm committed to doing. It's what I've been doing.
Well, I can tell you, though, some of the polls that I've read, some of the exit polls from Republican voters, generally, by and large, may not approve of Governor Sanford personally, but his policies and his style of governing, they do approve of. That would also seem to be a pretty tough tack to take, I would think.
Well, of course, in the Republican primary, that folks elected Mark Sanford as the nominee and supported Nikki Haley. So it doesn't surprise me that those kind of gridlock and antagonistic politics were rewarded for Miss Haley. But I think the public in general is pretty sick and tired of us not accomplishing anything in this state, pretty sick and tired of seeing the partisanship, the bickering, the scandals, the continued inability to get along, and most unfortunately the embarrassment that's been brought to South Carolina. So from what I can tell from the public at large, people are pretty tired of what we've had, and they're looking for something new.
This politics of personal destruction is what we saw a lot of in their particular primary. I didn't hear much from you as people commented on what was going on in the Republican primary, but having a wife, children, I'm sure that you had your own deep personal thoughts about what you were witnessing there.
Well, it was an awful thing to watch in the Republican primary, and I guess the sadder thing is it's what we've watched for the last 8 years in South Carolina with that entire leadership style. It really is a Washington-style approach that Mark Sanford brought to South Carolina from his experience in Washington, and it's truly not been in the best interest of South Carolina. And my whole campaign is about not following that path, but about bringing people together, working with folks to find solutions to the serious problems that we face. And one thing that you'll have seen in the politics of Mark Sanford and in what Nikki Haley has done over the last year is that there's not a lot of substance talked about, not a lot of how do we create jobs in South Carolina, how do we improve public education, how do we make this state a better place to live in, and that's what we have to have if we're going to move forward.
Well, what is this storyline about her that a lot of people are talking about in her perceived inability to get along with people in the General Assembly? Where does that come from?
Well, it comes from her inability to get along with people in the General Assembly and get along perhaps even more worrisome with the businesses and private sector development in the state. As you know, I've been endorsed by the State Chamber of Commerce, something that usually does not happen to a Democrat in South Carolina.
Not these days.
No, but it's because they see me as a candidate who has the ability to bring jobs into this state, has the ability to work with people to lower that unemployment rate that we've seen skyrocket over the last 8 years under the current administration, that I have that ability to work with the colleges and universities to train a highly skilled workforce that North Carolina has done over the last 10 years to keep their unemployment rate lower than ours. And so I think that the worries about continuing along the legacies of Mark Sanford are very real.
Let me ask you about sort of the national media. You were talking about some of the scandal that has enveloped this state. You know, I love Jon Stewart. I think he's hilarious, comic genius. But I tell you what, if you watch some of that, if you don't laugh, you're going to start crying because you get beyond that and you realize, well, there's an awful lot of deep-seated problems here. What do you think about our national image when you see bits like that on Comedy Central?
Well, if you think of the last 8 years and you think of what the national view of South Carolina has been, it's been that we've had a treasurer that went to jail, it's that we had an agricultural secretary who was indicted, we had a governor who embarrassed the state, we had comments by statewide elected officials that just made us look ridiculous. I think the image of South Carolina right now is not good. And we need a steady hand in the governor's office. We need somebody who can restore respect. We need somebody who is respected and can bring people together in this state so we can project an image of being business friendly, of being stable, of being a state that welcomes people into our wonderful communities.